Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're listening to this podcast, and welcome to the Goddess Project podcast. I'm so happy to be with you guys again. Happy New Year. If you're new to this podcast, thank you so much for joining and for subscribing and for sharing. Welcome, welcome. And if you've been with me since the beginning, well, welcome, welcome, welcome. This episode is for YouTube only, so because it's totally visual, and I'm going to do something in this episode that I have not done before, so it's a good way to start off the year, I think. I went to an exhibit, and well, I went to a conference from which I went to an exhibit, and it is time that we discuss what is going on with museums, with modern archaeology, with representation of the ancient world, and all of those stories. So we are going to go on a little exhibit visit together. So I'm going to share photographs from the exhibit. I'm going to share labels. I'm going to share all of these things from the exhibit. And we are going to talk about what is going on with the goddess, what is going on with everything. If you don't know me and you're new, my name is Dr. Carla Ionescu. My PhD is in ancient history with a focus on the goddess Artemis. And so my research is solely based on the goddess Artemis as far as publications are concerned. But of course, anything in the ancient Greco-Roman and recently ancient, let's say, Balkan, Eastern European regions have piqued my interest, in part because Artemis, I think, can now be found in the Balkans and in ancient, in Thracian culture, for example, and Etruscan culture. So I am on a path to discover Artemis all over the Mediterranean, the Near East, the Eastern European, the Nordic, like so all of this major geographic space, and who knows, perhaps even other places. But at this point in time, I'm kind of centered there. And so if you want to follow along with my research and soon to be travels, please join me anywhere online anywhere on social media under Artemis Expert. If you would like to support my travels and support these kind of visits to exhibitions and to rare sites, please join me on Patreon. Today, we're also going to do an after the podcast. After the podcast is a short episode, 20 minutes, half an hour, in which I discuss something that is a little more, I don't want to say controversial because we get quite controversial even here, but maybe just a little more mysterious and a little bit of my own opinions and maybe a little bit more of my own specific research. So, and that's for my Patreon supporters. I post it there after I post this podcast. So if you would like to watch that episode, I'll put the links. The links are already actually in the description. And if you would like to join me on a learning platform, you can join me through the Artemis Research Center. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can sign up in our learning platform. Right now, I'm in the middle of a workshop called the Goddess Migration Workshop, which is sold out, totally sold out. And I'm so excited. We're doing 8 weeks of looking at how the goddess moves through mostly Near East and Anatolia, ending with Artemis of Ephesus. So if you've actually the Virgin Mary, we're going to talk about the Virgin Mary as well in this workshop. So if you've missed this workshop, we are going to offer it again. I'm not sure when, but if you're signed up to one of the platforms or the newsletters, you are going to be kept abreast of when our workshops are coming up. We are also considering doing a workshop in the spring. I will be leaving for Crete at the beginning of April, and then I'm going to go on a research trip all over Greece looking for temples. So my colleague and I that run the workshops are going to probably run something on the Minoans and the Cretans, but I'm not yet sure. Yeah, so keep an eye out for that if you want to join us for those kinds of workshop. So I'm going to share my screen with you all now, so that we can begin talking about this exhibition, which I cannot even tell you how it blew my mind in its, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the fact that it's completely erasing, or it's literally erasing and deleting the goddess. Yeah. So let's get to that now. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Okay. My apologies, that took a minute, computers. So the title of this is Deleting the Goddess. Now, one of my arguments and one of my suspicions actually for quite some time has been that museums and modern archaeologists are starting to take the word goddess out of all of their labels, and they are replacing it with just figure, sometimes women, and often just figure. And I've had this suspicion for quite some time where I was like, something is going on here and I'm not sure what it is. And it feels kind of weird. Okay. But, and for a long time, I'm also a supporter of not making assumptions. I do want to say that as an academic, I am a supporter of not making assumptions. But if we are not going to make assumptions about the goddess, then we should not make assumptions about anything else. So one of the aspects of this exhibit that really irked me, is the fact that they were making assumptions and saying they were not making assumptions. And that was really, really upsetting. The other thing that's very upsetting, the reason why I'm doing this entire episode, is that I feel like people go into an exhibit just like that goddess exhibit that the British Museum had, the, what was it called now? The demonic or the divine, and it was like 12 or 15 goddess statues. Maybe I'll do an episode on that one too if you really like it. If you really like this one. 12 or 15 goddess statues that were placed, in the space, and people just kind of walked around, and there was absolutely no context, there was no connection, and there was nothing demonic. You know what? I think I will do an episode on that because I think it's so important when you put on an exhibit and people are coming in and they may know nothing about the goddess or the exhibit itself or anything like that. And those who are presenting it are responsible for the way that the labels are written, for the way that you take people through the material, for the showcasing of the pieces, the connections between one piece and another. It doesn't take much. So if any of you watching are working at the British Museum, please let them know. I can very freely offer my services to help create an exhibit that actually takes people through a storyline. Now, this exhibit that I'm going to show you is called The First Kings of Europe. Okay. So I went to the speech of the two academics that they're listed here. Sorry, they're listed here. So William Parkinson, Ryan Schussler is also one of them, and Attila Gicha. They are the academics and archaeologists that worked on this exhibit. So I was at a conference in Chicago, the AIA, the American Archaeology conference, and we were going to all these talks, etc. And this was a special talk by these two, William was there and Attila, about this exhibit. And the exhibit was part of, the conference events. And so I was very excited because one of the things that I really wanted to see is the Eastern European tradition. So all of the pieces that I'm showing you today, and the entire exhibit is from Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, all of Eastern Europe, which, if I don't know if you know, but this is a very, very rare collection in the sense that it doesn't leave Eastern Europe ever, really. Now, at this talk, we were told that this exhibit had been in the work for a long time. The scholars received $400,000 plus from government funding to put on this exhibit. And because COVID hit, a smaller version of this exhibit, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, was shown at the International Cultural Museum in New York City. Okay. And so I went to see that small collection. It was maybe 2 rooms, not even 1.5 rooms, in New York City, and it was fantastic. Okay, and we're gonna talk a little bit about both of these exhibits. And then once COVID was over, the pieces from the New York City space and all these other pieces that I'm showing you today were brought to Chicago, to the Field Museum in Chicago, as part of this larger exhibition. So what really, really shocked me was the change in labels from the New York City exhibit to the Chicago exhibit. Same pieces, same thing, but a change in labels. Okay. So I want you to think about why? Why does this happen? Labels are made purposely, and they are made, how do I say this? They are written very carefully, and they are the only piece of education that someone walking through this exhibit would have. Okay. So the exhibit is celebrated and promoted using this wreath. Okay. So this wreath is from Bulgaria. It's from 375 BCE. I use the term BC here because this actual exhibit in Chicago actually uses BC, which as an academic is embarrassing, first of all. Okay. So whoever was checking these labels, the fact that they are using BC instead of BCE and CE, or at least BCE, is embarrassing and should have already given me some kind of a little red flag. But okay. So this is the end piece of the exhibit. We're going to get to it. So we're going to come full circle in the exhibit. But this is the end piece, this gold wreath with what looks like, might be, but is unclear. Well, it's definitely a female figure. Some people say it's Nike. It's unclear because she doesn't have her wings. And so it's unclear who it is. Okay. Again, assumptions. Okay. But let's go with Nike, since many wreaths have Nike on them as a symbol of victory, obviously. And this is attributed to a Thracian history, okay, and the influence of Thracians and Greeks in the region of ancient Bulgaria. Okay. We begin so it's called the First Kings of Europe, which is already problematic, okay, because as you'll see, there are no kings, 0 kings during this period. The speakers, the 2 academics in charge of this exhibit at the conference talk, said that they were inspired by people like Bill Gates and the guy who owns Facebook, whose name now escapes me, Elon Musk, etc. And so they were asking themselves, oh, how do all these white men become in charge of, 2%, 5%, whatever, of the world's wealth, et cetera, et cetera. So they were inspired by wealthy billionaires of today in capitalism. And they thought, oh, you know what? We're going to create an exhibit about Bronze Age, pre-Bronze Age Eastern Europe, and ask ourselves, how did the first kings of Europe become established? As you'll see from the exhibit, there are no kings. It's totally nonsensical. But okay, let's get to it. So you can see that I'm super impassionate. Okay. Take that as you like, but I'm irked at the elitism and absolute disregard for Eastern Europe. As an Eastern European, I am offended by this exhibit, and as a woman, I'm offended by this exhibit. And perhaps you will be too. Let's see. Yeah. So the entire exhibit begins with the king, with a queen, the Queen of Romania, Maria Alexandra Victoria. This is a replica of her crown. Again, why do we begin with a queen when the exhibit is called the First Kings of Europe? Totally illogical. Nothing is explained. Okay. But here is her crown. So the scholars at the talk were saying, well, we want to begin with a crown. What? This queen was around in 1922. This exhibit is all about pre-Bronze Age and Bronze Age. Makes no sense. We then have sort of chapter 1 as you enter the exhibit, a land before kings. And we're told that 8,000 years ago, the world was smaller. No, it wasn't, but okay. And then talks about Southeastern Europe, people in villages farm, they raise livestock, etc. They traded with their neighbors. They believed in a supernatural world above their own and kept their ancestors close. I want you to keep that in mind, as much of the exhibit has nothing to do with the divine or divine worship, and it makes no mention of it. And in fact, at the talk, someone had asked, well, what of their religion? Do you have anything about their religion? And they go, and their answer was, I think it was Attila that answered that said, well, we don't have any, we don't actually have any literal or oral narrative evidence. All we have is these pieces, and that's it. We have no context around them other than, some historical data of maybe who was in the land at the time. Even that is a little bit vague because, of course, it's all named by modern scholars, but whatever. And so we don't know. And yet here we have the very first chapter talks about what they believed in, as though we have evidence of what they believed in. Okay. While a few households distinguished themselves through their deeds and goods, they mostly worked and lived as equals. I don't know about you, but this sounds like an assumption to me. Okay, this sounds like an assumption. So let's keep that in mind as we move through the exhibit. One of the things that's very clear about pre-Neolithic and Neolithic people is that they worshipped a goddess figure, a female figure, okay, often called a goddess. Okay, so this is Venus here from France, right? She's about 35,000 years old in the cave. I read something recently. She's holding a horn in her hand, and people used to think it was a half moon, but it's actually a horn. The horn has 13 lines in it, which represents the 13 moons or period cycles of a woman, and of course, the 13 months as ancient people used to worship them. And then I've given you some examples here of other female figurines, very clearly female and yet more than female. There's this kind of, in the beginning, these were thought to be dolls. They were thought to be toys. Later on, they were thought to be pornographic material. Yeah. And only now, because we found them in burial sites, pornographic material. Anyways, we only recently, and I'd say, of course, with Maria Gimbuta's work, who she was working in the 70s, but other scholars that sort of continue to discover more and more figurines are starting to realize, no, these must have some other meaning more than just, more than just pornographic or toys. And often these are called goddess figurines or female figurines. It is true, and I do want to say that we don't know whether or not these are goddesses or depictions of real women. But if you look at some of them, for example, this one with the 4 breasts, you can clearly see, and especially if they have the bird head, which a lot of them have bird heads or animal heads, it is very clearly not a literal depiction of a woman. It is very clearly something more. And I think most scholars believe that. And yet recently, there has been a silent move, which I'm calling the deletion of the goddess or the erasure of the goddess, that's going on in academia and in museums in the name of accuracy and non-assumption. I say that with quotation marks. There is this move to rename, relabel these figures into female figures rather than goddess figures. So let's talk a little bit about what's in the museum. I think this is probably the most disturbing piece, and it's right at the beginning. I went there with a friend who is a fantastic photographer and museum. If you want to follow her, her handle is Images of Antiquity. And we were there at the conference together, and then we went to the museum together. And I stepped into the museum knowing some of the pieces because I'd already been to the museum in New York City and photographed them. And so I went in there quite naively thinking I would see something similar or a similar organization. And it was very different. Okay. And we entered the first room, the first chamber, with the statement of, in these vast northern plains, surrounded by mountains and crossed by rivers, each household strives to get ahead of its neighbors just a little. Again, how do you know? What are you talking about? none of the evidence here. In fact, I'm going to look at this image here of these goddess figures. This is a circular depiction. Circular is not hierarchical. There is zero, absolutely zero evidence of competition here. Zero. Okay. What's really fascinating is, as you can see here, I've made this a little bit bigger. This is a bird face goddess. Okay. This is not a woman. If you look at some of the images, you can see that they have very, very clear bird faces. Okay. And they're sitting around in the circle. Now, could these have been divine depictions of priestesses? Perhaps. Okay. But we have this statement here, again, so capitalist, so hierarchical, so patriarchal. Each of these figures represents a woman. Again, we don't know that, but okay. Some are seated, perhaps a sign of higher status. Again, we don't know that. We don't know anything. All we have is this group of figurines. In fact, we don't even know if they're positioned in this way, but okay. It's possible they're members of an extended family, okay, or they could represent different households, okay. In either case, they depict a defined community with some members having more prominent roles. Do they? Do they? Like, what? So here is a scholarly label. These figurines come from Romania, by the way. They are about, 7,000 years old. 7,000 years old. Again, with the BC here, which is so unacademic, so ridiculous. And we found these pieces. Okay? We have no idea what these pieces mean. This is all an assumption. Are they women, like within a tribe? Clearly, if you can see this one here, has clearly a beak. So there is something very ritualistic, very supernatural, very I'm gonna assume myself divine or unhuman. That's not a word, but you know what I mean? Here, that's happening here. And yet this label says, oh, these are just a bunch of women sitting around in a circle, which reminds me of Arthur Evans. When Arthur Evans arrived at Knossos in Crete, and he found what he calls a Minoan palace, which is problematic in its own, but we'll get to that another time. He found a room in which there was these massive paintings of women, which we now have in the museum in Heraklion. And he says, oh, initially he was like, oh, this must be a group, a room where women came to gossip. Because, there's just so many women everywhere in the frescoes. They probably just came around here, sat around having tea and gossiping. Okay, this is exactly what this is. This is an assumption that is so problematic and tone deaf and unacademic that it irked me. So I entered the museum irked. But what I want to show you is the same pieces, the same artifacts that were presented at the New York City exhibit. So as you can see, same artifact organized in the same way. Okay. And this label in New York City, thank God, okay? Thank the academic flippin' supervisors. This image has a BCE label, so you already know that this has been checked and double checked, okay? Same, of course, this comes from the same place, female figurines and model chairs, etc. Okay, but listen to this label. These apparently female figurines and model chairs were discovered inside a vessel at a site where a sanctuary likely stood almost 7,000 years ago. Although the ceramic women, again, a bit problematic, okay, but all right, it's not that they're not representations of women. I agree with that. All share a similar shape. Close inspection reveals variations in their faces and bodies. And scholars believe that each depicts a different character. Okay. Some researchers have also ventured that this collection represents a council of goddesses, with larger figurines symbolizing older divinities. Other researchers believe that these artifacts were used by Neolithic communities and that created them to understand aspects of group identity in an earthly realm. Okay. Despite the multiple interpretations of this astonishing grouping, scholars are united in their conviction that the figurines served a potent ritual function. Okay. So whoever did these labels, is a true scholar. This label is and this so this is part of the larger exhibition. This is the exhibition that is being flaunted in Chicago. This is the exhibition that's being sort of promoted, and everybody's like, go see this exhibition, blah blah. And this is what we have as a label. Okay, it's embarrassing and it's infuriating, absolutely infuriating. It is true that you don't have to label these goddesses as I do, because each scholar or groups of scholars have different ideas. None of us know, none of us, okay? Not one scholar knows anything for 100% certain. Let's make that very, very clear. Not one scholar. Whoever you rely on for your scholarly advice, you rely on them because maybe you trust their research or what they're saying makes sense, but they don't know. Nobody knows. We are all guessing. We found these in the ground and we are guessing. And yes, an educated guess is very different than just a popular guess. Yes, that is very true. But no one can say with 100% certainty, in which this label makes it very, very clear that it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. Scholars have different opinions. When I first went to New York City and I saw this, I had no problem with it whatsoever. No problem with it. But when I was in Chicago and I saw this, whew, as you can see, you're here with me. So things were problematic. Yeah. We then move on to something that is even more disturbing. Even more disturbing. Okay. We have found in Romania, which is my home country, okay, an altar from a sanctuary in Romania at Parta, okay? Again, 7,000 years old, maybe more. In this altar, we have a pregnant woman and a bull. Now, as an ancient historian, especially someone who spends so much time in the pre-Neolithic, I have seen, and as some of you have been with me in this podcast in many episodes, you know I've done work on the horned goddess and the horned god. You know I've done work on bulls. You know I've done work on Neolithic pregnancies and depictions of pregnancies and the uterus and the triangle, the pubic triangle. So when I approached this piece, I was neither surprised nor shocked that in an altar in a sanctuary, there is a woman and a bull. Okay. The bull is not necessarily a representation of a man. That's something that's very dated. It's very dated scholarship. Okay. We will call this bull a consort. Okay. And yes, sometimes bulls represent masculinity. We're not denying that. But in the Neolithic and the pre-Neolithic, there is so many relationships between women and powerful animals in a magical way, like a magical marriage. For example, I'm reading a book now called The Woman Who Married the Bear, and it's a lot of mythological research in both indigenous North American tribes who have lots of stories of women marrying bears and Nordic European traditions who have lots of stories of women marrying bears. And my own home country, Romania, has lots of stories of women marrying bears. So it would not surprise me at all that this is a depiction of a woman or a goddess marrying a bull consort, like a bull god, not literally a bull. And that this is a representation of the goddess and her consort. But I mean, look at it. I mean, but this is what the label says, okay? I don't know what this means. They came to worship together. Who? Who came to worship together? But anyways, these statues is only one. It's one statue. But anyway, of a pregnant woman and a figure with a bull's head, okay, stood on a ceremonial altar at the center of a large settlement. On the spring equinox each year, sunlight shone on the bull's head. What? Okay. How do you know? Okay. Archaeologists may never know precisely how this altar was used, but they speculate that bulls were sacrificed here and that the altar was used by the community to leave offerings to a deity. What is this label? What is this label? Bulls were sacrificed here based on what? Absolutely zero evidence. Zero, zero. No bull skulls, no bull horns, no nothing. Zero, zero evidence. Okay. What about the pregnant woman? What about the pregnant female figure? There is nothing in this label. There's nothing in this label that says, why do they look like they share one body? Nothing. There's nothing in this label. And I don't know how they figured out that the sun shone on the bull's head. I'm going to give them the benefit and the doubt and say maybe wherever it was found on this altar, they could measure that the sun reaches. I don't know. Okay. But if you look at Cretan mythology, for example, where the bull, Asterion, which later the Mycenaeans named the Minotaur, where the bull, it plays a key role as the goddess consort. And yes, the horns of consecration and the horns are places for the equinox and the moon and other sort of astronomical events. This is very much a correlation, very much a correlation. And yet this label says nothing, nothing. In fact, it dismisses the connection that appears here. This is a very powerful image. This is a magnificent image. And yet there is nothing here that even alludes to it. You don't have to say we know, okay? But here you are like, oh, we speculate that bulls were sacrificed here. So as you can see, my ire kept moving up and up and up. Yeah, kept moving up. I don't know why my face is so red, you guys, but either way, maybe I'm getting a little bit heated. Then we have, I mean, I've just used one here. We have numerous depictions of female divinities like this. I'm going to show you a bunch. This is a face pot with a seated woman. Okay, yes, it is. The marks on the wrist and upper arm represent spondylus shell bracelets and arm earrings, probably status symbols of those who could trade for exotic goods. This is absolutely nonsense. Absolute nonsense. We have no idea what this means. And we have no idea what these symbols mean. We have no idea if they're bracelets. We have no idea of any of it. And one of the things that really irked me about this exhibit is that every figure, so we had the queen at the beginning, we have a priestess body, I'm going to show you in a minute, and we have a young woman's body. And in fact, I think we have another woman's body. Every figure that we found with all the jewelry and with all their bones intact and things intact is a woman. Now, one could argue, well, maybe the men were on the battlefield and maybe they die that way. Okay. It is unclear whether or not in this region at this point in time, 7,000 years ago, Neolithic period, whether there was the kind of war that we are thinking about. As you'll see, the exhibit does take us further into the future, into the Bronze Age, and then we do have examples of weaponry, but we have no artifacts of weaponry at this time. Okay, and this piece, and certainly in this exhibit. And so then we move into this assumption that we see here. Ancestors were like their gods. Okay, the people of the Neolithic recognized a supernatural world beyond themselves. Okay, the beings of this spiritual world included deities, great people they had heard stories about, or even their own ancestors. Okay, these beings were represented in ceramic figurines. Hello? So supernatural beings here and in the other goddesses. Vessels with human faces, many of which were kept in household shrines. So are these figures that we're looking at, especially those women, those bird women or bird figurines that I just showed you, were they kept in household shrine? Does that not make them goddesses? Why are we not saying the word goddess or god? But okay, we're saying deities. People around the world still kept their ancestors' clothes as it's common as a photo of grandparents on the wall. Okay. Fine, no problem. Another thing that's really fascinating is they have these wall paintings. And in the wall paintings, again, you have very patriarchal assumptions being made. Very, very patriarchal assumptions being made. In an exhibit that says we can make no assumptions. Then we enter into another room. So think about the exhibit as separate rooms taking us through time. So we start in the sort of early pre-Neolithic, then the Neolithic, then we move into the Bronze Age, and then we move into the Gilded Age, then the Bronze Age, etc. And we come up right before actual kings of Europe begin existing. So there are no kings whatsoever. The name is just a catchy promo, okay? There's no kings. So moving into the next room, from fire, rock, and steam, they made copper, axes, gold idols, and silver jewelry. Okay, fine. So now we're into like chapter 2, the Gilded Age. And we are told the world was thrust forward when a few people learned how to extract metal from the earth. How do we know it was a few people? We know nothing. Okay, nothing. From fire, rock, and steam, they made gold idols and silver jewelry. These inventions led to the Copper Age. My apologies, Copper Age before the Bronze Age, when metalworking carried mystery, magic, even. Okay, for those who didn't understand how these glistening objects were crafted. What? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? So you're telling me that a community or a city or a village that discovers gold, copper, etc., and then makes it into these fantastic shapes doesn't understand how these glittery things are magic? What are you talking about? You know? And even if you were not part of the dig or part of the sculpting, someone in your community, when you asked, oh, what is this gold thing, would say, oh, hey, they dig it out of the ground and then they make this. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. It's mind-boggling the way we assume that so many ancients were just stupid. They were just fascinated by lightning and fascinating by gold and fascinating by the rain they were just afraid of their own shadows. And yet, they survived 100,000 years more or more for us to be alive today. So sometimes I get a little irked with this assumption. And for those who controlled the supply of the metals, these precious objects brought power. How do we know? How do we know? There are no massive buildings. There are no massive ancient structures. In this particular area of the world at this time, we have no names engraved. We have no language. We have nothing written. So how do we know that some people who control the gold had power? This is a modern assumption looking back. Okay. And I don't want to say that it's completely wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you cannot put it as fact without knowing. All you can say is we have so much gold in this area. In fact, I'm going to show you cases and cases and cases of jewelry, which to me would say that lots of people had gold. Lots and lots of people, because we don't know. It's not like we found it in someone's house and says, oh, Joe Smith here owned all of this. We don't know. Okay. We don't know. So here are some examples of pieces of gold that we found, and here are some examples of weaponry as well, or tools, maybe more tools rather than weapons. Okay, because some of these are handles for axes or axe heads. Okay, but what's really fascinating about these gold pieces is, as you can see, they're very much in feminine shape, breasts, and you can't see in this picture. I'm sorry, but there's sometimes like a V here. This is very much a larger piece that also has breasts and a belly. Okay. This has eyes and I don't know, it's kind of breasty. Yeah. So lots and lots of pieces like this. Let me see where I put the other. Oh, no, we're moving now into the next. But lots of pieces. I think I have a few more images that have the entire glass station with all gold. So lots and lots of pieces of gold, lots. In fact, that is one of the pride of the museums in Eastern Europe, particularly Romania and Bulgaria, where these have been found, where the gold pieces, sorry, let me go back, where these gold pieces have been found, because there's just so much gold, so much gold. Okay. And so this may have been traded, of course, but it may also have been fairly common to have gold. I just want to say there's no assumptions to be made. We then move on, and this really, really starts to make my blood boil, okay? Because this is not just about women or goddesses. This is also about ancient Eastern European men and ancient Eastern European culture, and the idea that they are shocked and surprised by every little thing, and that they are not inventive, but rather duplicated. So we walk now into the next room, okay? In the stillness of the night, they encountered a great black creature never seen before, carrying a man on its back. It's a horse with a guy on it, okay? Like this sense that they were so primitive or without knowing that when they saw a man on a horse, they were, just flabbergasted. It's so insulting. It's so insulting because trade happened all over the world. We don't know exactly when horses were domesticated at which point in time in this part of the world, but certainly someone coming in on a horse. I mean, they saw deer, they saw other animals, there were wild horses. I mean, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So I had to be a little calm because I was getting a little defensive of my Eastern European ancestors. And I thought to myself, this is insulting. You can say, horse culture or domesticated horses or whatever arrived in this area around this time. You can say that. That could be more, you could lean more towards a fact like that, but don't say it like they were just coming out from under a rock and they saw a figure, a dude on a horse or a woman, who knows? Back then, everybody rode horses, right? We then have we begin to see pieces that were wagons. So obviously, they had wagons, they had the wheel. I mean, we are talking about the Bronze Age now, okay? We're talking about 5,000 years ago now. We've moved forward. Only the most powerful warrior could wield these shields. So we have this gold shield here that is actually not a real, sword, not a real sword, but it is a gold sword. So it's a decorative sword. And we're told only the most powerful warrior could wield the sword. We have no idea who this sword belongs to. No idea. So who wielded it? Who wore it? We don't know. Could have been a dude, could have been a woman, could have been a priestess, could have been a priest, could have been anybody. Okay. But the assumption is only the most powerful warrior could wield the sword. Nonsense. Nonsense. We then have discovered bronze, as you can see, this whole room is filled with bronze weapons, lots and lots of weapons. So we've got swords, we've got headgear, we've got body gear, we even have some leg gear, etc. Okay. Their most powerful warriors were adorned with bronze. We don't know. Again, we don't know. And then here we talked about how, bronze was uh, a less common metal, and we're told that high-ranking warriors were often clad in it. We don't even know yet if we have a warrior cult. We do know clearly through these weapons and these outfits that there may have been reason to wear them. But so many of them are thinly made and poorly made that we're uncertain whether they were ceremonial mostly or they were actually used in battle. And then we're told that we have this new power, this new roots to power. And we're told that the Eastern Europeans, their world rapidly expanded when the Yamnia people from the East arrived, riding creatures largely unknown in Europe. Horses. Okay. Trade networks open, with them came a wealth from abroad, bronze, amber, carnelian, etc., but also war. So now we are told that the Eastern people, the Yamnia people, brought war into this region. Okay. By the Bronze Age, 5,000 years ago, this world was at war for control of trade, lands, and people. Warriors were the elite and the closest to the gods. Again, we don't know that. We don't know that. We know nothing. Okay, so we have zero evidence that warriors are the elite and the closest to the gods. We have zero evidence of a male god. We have zero evidence of a warrior god. We have zero evidence. Okay. Imagine that you're a scholar and what you see is just what you see in front of you right now for this particular period. Okay. And you have to make assumptions in some ways, although perhaps you can look at the history around Europe at that time, but that history around Europe at that time is very much the same. Very, very much the same. So there was agriculture, there were certainly wagons, there were horses, okay, they arrived whenever. And there seems to have been some battle. Is it war? Unsure. Are the highest elites going to battle? Unsure. Does battle in early Bronze Age look like battle later on in the Greco-Roman period? We don't know. We don't know anything. Okay. And so making these assumptions implies a patriarchal, hierarchical, who was making the decisions to go to battle? We don't know. Was it men? Was it women? So this leads me to my next point. We have found, like I said, numerous jewelry. Okay. And one of the pieces that we found that are, and these are many pieces, we have some here, but there are plenty more that did not make it out of the museums in Eastern Europe. We see examples of these violin-shaped burial figurines. These are goddesses. Okay. These are not masculine gods. These are not individual women. These are goddesses. Okay. People maybe carry them inside their, in their pockets or on their body for protection. They may have put them in their homes. They certainly put them in their grave sites. These are goddesses and representations of the goddesses. I mean, there are times when we have to just say what it is. Okay. So we have found lots of these. And here I've put an example. I really like this setup because it really shows how many goddess figurines we found versus swords. So as you can see, there's only one sword here. And 6 goddess figurines. So my argument would be that these, at this point in time, and then we see lots of jewelry here, lots of decoration. To make jewelry, you have to have some time of peace. People don't make jewelry in the middle of wars and battles. So to make jewelry means, and to gift jewelry and to wear jewelry implies at least a period of peace, a period of trade, a period of creativity. People need to sit down and create and be creative. This kind of stuff takes time, money, trade. And so to imply that this time was a time of warriors and the elite went to war and blah, blah, blah is absurd and inaccurate and irresponsible, actually. Irresponsible. Because what we're doing is we're propagating this image of patriarchal violence on a people that we know nothing about other than we found their jewelry and perhaps their little good luck goddess charms and a few swords. Yeah. So the label says these examples of violence come from the island group of the Cyclades in the Aegean Sea, close to Greece. So if you know about Cycladic images, that's actually something I've been wanting to do an episode on for a long time. But the truth is that we don't know anything about, we have found thousands and thousands and thousands of Cycladic pieces, and we know nothing about this time and this period, and these pieces. But perhaps I'll do one just because they continue to be one of the most mysterious communities slash moments in time slash spaces in ancient Greek history. The Cycladic elite were crafting these figurines for hundreds of years before they reached southeastern Europe. Again, we don't know who was crafting these. We don't know if they had a class system in place. We don't know if the elites were the craftsmen or women, or just people were crafting them, or perhaps people that were really skilled at crafting were crafting them. Do you see how language is power here? The idea, again, is a repetitive propaganda. And it irks me as a historian because it is irresponsible and inaccurate. Yeah. And it says nothing about the fact that we have so many of these pieces. So many. What were they for? They're very small, like the small, and they're very thin. So I think they were very easily carried around, or they were placed, around the house. So they're something that the way Christians have crosses, for example, or other people maybe have symbolic pieces on their bodies of their religion. It could be that. Again, that would be my assumption based on how many of them we found and the way that they seem to be made fairly easily and quickly. And they're very light and small and cute. Oh, I did. So I brought you lots of gold images, lots of gold, lots of gold. The birth of royalty. Again, we have zero evidence of this. Zero. I'm looking at you with zero. Warriors eventually became royals. Did they? Do we have any evidence of that? No. by wielding armies to create dynasties and kingdoms where there had been none. This is such a umbrella statement, such a colonialist, Greco-Roman patriarchal statement. I cannot spend the time in this episode unpacking it for you, but needless to say, you cannot take the histories of people 1,000 years in the future or 2,000 years in the future and pull it back into this time and go, well, because the Romans did this and the colonialists even further down the road did this. This means that this Eastern European section of people also did this. This is a complete assumption based in the fact that there's so much gold to be found in this area. Okay. And as you can see, these little pieces of gold. Now, what's really fascinating, of course, that's not mentioned at all, is that all of these are goddess symbols. So we've got triangles, which I've talked about at length in other episodes. Triangles have always been goddess symbols, whether they're this way or whether they're this way. We've got spirals, lots and lots of spirals, which I think most of you know are goddess symbols, symbols of infinity, symbols of immortality, symbols of divinity, symbols of fertility, etc., etc. We've got these flowers. So this piece is this piece up here that I just brought it here for you to see. More spirals and this floral pattern. Again, symbols that are, Thracian and later on Greek. And so symbols that sort of that are cross-cultural, but always of a goddess culture or a culture in which the goddess is worshipped, or at least at minimum, the goddess is in the pantheon. We also have these mystery pieces here with these interesting weird heads that are very feminine in nature. At least we know they're feminine. Actually, I didn't post them here, but there are a few others that have like the two legs, so they're more masculine. Okay, just a mess. Okay, to their subjects, again, we have no kings, no evidence of kings yet, none. To their subjects, these rulers were not just closer to gods; they were the gods. Again, what? How do you know this? 2,500 years ago, in the Iron Age, these were Europe's first kings and queens sitting atop an increasingly unequal society. What kings? What queens? What were their names? What did they rule? Where did they rule? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Zero. Zero evidence. Zero. Zero. We have no names. We have no kings. We have no queens. All we have is jewelry. Okay? We don't even have buildings. All we have is jewelry. And then we have this little caveat here. Some of their royals were women. No. You mean men and women may have ruled a village together? Wow. The roles of women in the Iron Age varied across southeastern Europe according to different cultural traditions. That's true. In Illyria, a tribal society in the western part of the Balkan Peninsula, women could hold important positions. Like what? Further south, in cities like Athens, women were not even citizens. That's not true, actually. But okay. So this is playing with words. You know what I'm saying? Because women did not play a key role in of course, of the Athenian Senate, and they couldn't vote. But certainly, a Greek citizen man needed a Greek citizen woman, or the woman that had a Greek citizen father. Anyways, this is a very long rant that I could go on. But it's a way of using history and manipulating it and using language to say things that are not necessarily accurately true. These gold, silver, and amber pieces were found in the grave of an Illyrian woman, suggesting she had power and high standing in her community. So, like I said before, the only evidence, the only bodies that we have found in the ground decorated in this area, in this time, and a little bit pre this time, and actually even a little bit post this time, are women. 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 We have no male body buried with this regalia. Let's call it regalia. No men. No, sir. Only women. In fact, even one of the bodies, which I'm not going to show you because I don't like to show bones or bodies here, but I can show you some images, but not the actual bones or body or anything. But even the youngest, most decorated body that we found is a young girl. A young girl. So there's no way that this young girl was ruling as a queen. And yet she is so decorated that she was very clearly celebrated. Was she the leader of a community? We don't know. Was she the daughter of the leader? We don't know. We don't know. Yeah. So this, I think, is a type of peace offering because they found this treasure trove with this Illyrian woman. And of course, the colonialist, the patriarchal mind goes, oh, she must have been a queen. Maybe she was a high priestess. Maybe she was a warrior queen or no, see, I'm using that language too. Maybe she was a warrior woman that had earned all that gold. We don't know. We found her bones with all this wealth. Okay. We then have this piece that I really, really love. Again, one of the reasons why I put this here. So this is Nike, and she is riding on a chariot of horses, and it's an earring. First of all, the earring is so small that, as you can see here to the side, there's a magnifying glass so that you could get an actual picture because it goes in your ear. And could you imagine how lovely it would have hung down? So again, lots of gold, lots of gold. This is from Bulgaria. This is in the Iron Age, lots of gold. But I want you to see the difference again in labels. Number one, this says gold earring, Iron Age, 250 to 200 BC. Every time I see BC, I feel like I've stepped back in time, about 5,000 years. I've also added the image, the picture that I took when I was in New York City, same earring. Excuse me, like I said, same presentation, same exhibit, very much the same pieces. But look at this depiction. This ear, so this in Chicago, this is all you see: gold earring, Iron Age, blah blah blah. Here you have a depiction. This earring was found in the tumulus burial of a Thracian elite woman. Okay, so again, women's burial sites, alongside other very elaborate gold jewelry. On its surface, it is an extremely ornate representation of the winged Greek goddess Nike. So we know that Greek influence was already in this space by this time. Okay. The representation and style indicate that the earring was a product of Greek workshop, possibly in the Greek colonies of the Black Sea coast. So here you have a responsible academic label, because as a person that maybe is walking around this exhibition and has no idea what this fantastic piece of jewelry is, if you're walking around Chicago, all you get is this gold earring, Iron Age. You get nothing else. And yet in New York City, those who decided to create these fantastic details gives you a whole story. And this is the purpose of this episode, is that there seems to be something very sinister happening in Chicago, something very sinister with this exhibit that is purposely deleting and rewriting history in a 1990s version of archaeology, a very dated, very old version of archaeology. We then have the grave of the Illyrian girl, another Illyrian girl, and we have this this jewelry that we have found on a woman's body. This exhibit claims maybe a priestess. Okay, so I find this so contradictory, so contradictory. We are told that this young girl was about 12 years old when she died, and she has all this jewelry that she was buried with, and the assumption is that she came from an influential family. Again, did she come from an influential family? Maybe she was considered a living god. Maybe their religion taught that the gods walked among them. Who knows? There are many, many religions across the world in which children are seen as the embodiment of a god or a goddess or a god. We know nothing. All we know is that we found this gravesite with this young woman who has all of these of jewelry and pieces. Okay. And then we find this other gravesite. We don't have the bones for this woman, but we have lots and lots of jewelry and pieces. So we're going through an exhibit in which it's called the Kings of Europe, the first kings of Europe. And as you can see, what we see is a bunch of material that very clearly belonged to women, whether they were women as priestesses, whether they were this young girl that was buried richly for some reason, whether it is goddess figurines, 7,000, 8,000 years ago, whether there's a pregnant woman and a bull. the majority of whether the exhibit began with the crown of the Queen of Romania, what we see here is an exhibit that is actually supported archaeologically, as far as material culture, by women and women's burial sites with some swords and one or two pieces of battle gear. Yeah. So why is it so purposely masculine? Okay. We then have this very beautiful urn, okay, which I absolutely love. This beautiful urn with carvings that's from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and which is also Eastern Europe. And it has these, it still has these beautiful drawings. And here on the side, I've shown you the drawings. So this is the actual piece itself with the engravings in them. And then I've shown you the four sides. So these are the four sides. Okay, so we've got a group of women with a wine jar. We've got some type of flying antelope. As you can see, they have wings here, right? So I don't know. These are deer, flying deer. I'm calling them antelope. I'm sorry, probably not antelopes. Some type of a deer animal or horse-like animal, no, horn-like animal that has wings. We then have a few men on horse, a couple of men on horses here and some horses here, and they do look like they're wearing a sword, a very long sword. Excuse me. And then we have what looks like a man with a wine jug and some type of a spear. And then there's a fish here. So there may be fishing here, like spear fish hunting. There's lots of rivers, lots of lakes in this region, of course. We then see the spirals that are also reminiscent of Greek culture and Thracian cultures, and more spirals here. So this is an urn that has carvings. If you look at this urn without reading anything about it, you can make very, very clear assumptions about just what you see. That there is a group of women that certainly played some type of ceremonial role here because they've got this jug, who knows what's in it, oil, wine, blah, blah, blah. That there is animal imagery on the sides. There's this magical antlered being, and then there's this fishing guy. We don't know if it's a man or a god. We don't know anything. And then the one side that has a couple of warriors as well. So what we see here is a almost like a complex, a complete image of the life of these people in 600, 300 BCE, Eastern Europe. So this is what we're told about this piece. They feasted in life and death. Okay. By the Iron Age, feasting had turned into a religious, political, and diplomatic ceremony. Did it? Okay. Royals and elites held elaborate feasts for a variety of reasons, even funerals. Did they? This is borrowed information, again, from other cultures, but okay. And would have been remembered for them after they died. The carvings on this urn depict one such feast and mythical scenes, because you can see that these are mythical animals, attributed to the Lapoda culture of the Balkan Peninsula in the Western Mountains. Okay, so again, if this is mystical, I'll give you that, because there's obviously some mystical animals here. Then would these not be priestesses? Would these not be celebrants? What is going on here? Now, I'm not picking on this piece as far as them making more assumptions. Oh God, I'm glad that they do not make more assumptions. But what I'm saying is women and women as priestesses and women as connection to either ancestors or the divine, whoever these groups worshipped, seem to be very, very important. Also, there is zero evidence here of kingship. I want you to think about that, because I get into this debate sometimes with people who think that the Minoans had palaces. In fact, we shouldn't even call them the Minoans because the Mycenaeans named them that. But there is zero evidence of kingship in Crete during the Minoan period. Zero. Okay. And I think it's time that we begin to start breaking down the assumptions that were made by early colonialist archaeologists who applied modern patriarchal, capitalist, or monarchical ideologies to what they found. It's time that we become aware of this and we rely on what we actually see and perhaps maybe some information that we have in this area around that time. Okay. We have to start being very vigilant about this, because if not, we end up with this kind of nonsense. Oh, kings and queens. What? What are you talking about? There is zero evidence of a monarchy. There is no crown. There is no scepter. There is nothing that has been found. In fact, you have to use a crown for a queen from 1922 to argue that there was kings. There's no kings. There's no kings. Leaders of communities, sure. Were they all men? We don't know. Maybe they were men and women. Okay. So it's so important. It's so important that we stay vigilant about this. I've given you here some examples. I'm not going to go into all of them, but other pieces that were found. The reason why I'm giving them to you here is because, as you can see, there are clearly some ceremonial gold swords. These are not to be used as weapons. Okay. So ceremonial gold spearheads, swords, etc. And then there's a bronze sword and what looks like some tools of the trade. We don't have a lot of battle material. So we have graves and graves of women wearing ceremonial material, but we don't have any bronze or iron battle material. And yet we're talking about, oh, this was a warrior culture that went to war and had kings. Come on, come on. And so I've put pieces here of other things they were making at the time. So they made gold stags. Again, when you're making jewelry, when you're making beautiful things, when you're making fun things like these bird-shaped bronze lamps or the ceramic duck or bird, very, very cute. When you are making silver goblets that have fantastical animals on them. So here we have another antlered being and other, birds and other symbols and things like that. You have this kind of serpent, this really great garnet pin that's like a serpent/dragon. Yeah. These are not, you're not doing this in the middle of war. Okay. You're making these when you have time, when you are creative, and for people who have the time to enjoy them, to wear them, to use them. Okay. So that argument again, that here we're in the Iron Age, now we're entering the war cult, right? Is not accurate. We don't know. And I'm not saying there was no battles, because that would be also inaccurate. But the lean of this exhibition, the education it's supposed to give you is inaccurate. And as a historian, it's disturbing. We then get closer to the end. So now we're coming closer to the end. And we enter a time that is super vague, super vague. We have this massive wall piece that says, where did they bury their royals? Which I found really interesting, because I was like, okay, let's see, where they bury their royals? What do we have? And so we have this whole aspect of these valuables being found in tumuli, this grand earthen mounds built for high status individuals, et cetera, et cetera. During the Iron Age, the elites were buried here. But this space that's supposed to be supposedly one of these tombs is unnamed. It doesn't tell us what is this space in this image, where is it, how can I visit it, how can I find out more about it, what's it called? It tells us nothing. It uses this grandiose imagery without a reference, which, as an academic who is putting on an exhibition that was funded by over $400,000 from taxpayer money, is embarrassing. Yeah. It is. It's unheard of. It's unheard of. Perhaps I should have gone to see the exhibit before I went to the talk, because then I would have been able to ask some of these questions that are just so blatant, and so questions of things that are so purposefully edited to create a fictional story around actual artifact pieces, that it's infuriating. It's infuriating. And then we're told that in history, the Thracians are remembered as barbarians. Like, I need a breath. Remembered by whom? By the Greeks? By the Romans? Who cares? Why do we remember a group of people based on the interpretation of another group of people? Like, so this helmet belongs to a Thracian royal. Again, does it? We don't know. Certainly a Thracian warrior, I will give. Yes. You can see much of the aspects that we've seen previously. Here is the interesting leaf pattern or the serpent pattern that we saw in that pin. Here is, again, a rooster eating a fish. Very, very natural phenomenon. Here is, again, an antlered being, right? And the crescent moon. Lots and lots of mythical imagery. Okay. Ancient Balkan rulers are largely known from the archaeological record, but they do not appear in written records until they encountered the Greeks and Romans. As rulers, are they named? Are they kings? Or are they just leading the army? In which case, they are leaders of some kind. These historians, the Greek and Romans, remember them as formidable, of dubious loyalty, and uncivilized barbarians. Well, good for the Greek and Romans. This was, of course, propaganda created by the Roman Empire, which ultimately conquered, colonized, and transformed the Balkan Peninsula. So thank you for putting that in there. But as you can see, so much of this is through the eyes of a modern male scholar who's looking through the eyes of Greco-Roman interpreters into a culture that remains a mystery. That remains a mystery. And then we come to the end, and we are back to that crown that I mentioned at the beginning. So this is the last piece of the exhibit. We are just told it's a gold wreath in Bulgaria, and that this wreath represents Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, and that much of Thracian wealth came from tributes paid by Greek colonies on the western coast of the Black Sea. So the relation, so you've just told us that the Greeks saw them as uncivilized barbarians, and yet Greek colonies paid them tribute. So it makes the person who's walking through the museum feel like, are we getting an accurate history? What is going on here? What were they? Why would the Greek colonies pay barbarians or the uncivilized tribute? Well, there must have been something else going on here, right? So it feels a little bit incomplete. And we have this sort of final statement. Wealth and political power rested in the hands of the few, then and now. Then? When? When? Are we talking about 8,000 years ago, where there's clearly zero evidence of wealth and power? Or are we talking about, just 2,500 years ago, where, for example, and 2,300 years ago, where, for example, this wreath was made, which is a very, very, very different time period. This story began in a world of Neolithic farmers, okay? It ends in a world transformed where rulers, like the Thracian king who wore this gold wreath, no one knows if this was a Thracian king or not, but okay, established royal bloodlines that kept power in their families for generation, okay? This form of government is still around today. Yeah, patriarchy, yeah, capitalism, yeah, oligarchy, yeah. We call it monarchy or oligarchy. Unlike the Neolithic world, this gilded world of Thracian kings and queens is one that looks much like our own. Okay, so we end here at a time when we still have unnamed so-called monarchies, unnamed kings. Historically speaking, we have no names yet. We have no castles slash pyramids slash, I don't know, any type of building of massive size. We have nothing. We do have wreaths that we're giving to them as tribute. Perhaps the Thracians never wore these things on their heads. Perhaps they only started wearing them when the Greeks gave it to them as gifts. Perhaps they weren't yet thinking of themselves as monarchies and oligarchies, maybe just leaders of communities, villages, cities, generals, perhaps, if they had such armies. Yeah, they might have at this point in time. So there is so much that is assumed here. in an exhibit that claims to make no assumptions, that it is beyond infuriating, beyond infuriating. Okay. Now, after the podcast, I am going to show you a few pieces that are magnificent that did not make it into this exhibit quite the way that they were exhibited in New York City. And I would say they're even more important pieces because they have, as you can see, the images of the bull, the Sphinx, other mystical figures here. So I'm going to talk about them in after the podcast. And I'm going to show you my images that I took in the New York City exhibit and the labels. But that is the end of my exclusive exhibit review of the first kings of Europe at the Field Museum in Chicago. It is a highly problematic exhibit. It is an exhibit that pulls us back in time, socially, academically, archaeologically, to the 1990s. It is an extreme disappointment. When I left the exhibit, I was asked, by the museum, they send you this email to give a review. And as you can imagine, I gave a scathing review. Not only is it not the kind of exhibit we should be funding from our tax-paying money in this day and age, I have no problem with exhibiting pieces from my own, for example, Eastern European culture. I love it. I look forward to it. I was very excited to see them. But to put them in this context of patriarchy, of warrior, of barbarian, of ignorant is insulting. And Attila, one of the men who put together this exhibit, is Polish. And so I was disappointed in his dated view of some of our shared culture. Some, although there are no Polish pieces here, but let's share the Eastern European culture. Certainly there's a lot of Romanian, Bulgarian, and Hungarian pieces here and some Serbian pieces. But, Eastern Europe has a complex history. It's a lot of moving around. There's a lot of renaming of spaces. There's a lot of conquering of spaces. And so let's call ourselves one people, as I'd like to do. Eastern European men can be, and often are, stuck in the 90s or the 80s as far as gender equality. Let's do gender equality. Yeah. And I speak this having an Eastern European father and a brother and uncles and all that kind of stuff. Not all, but. And so a part of me was not surprised that the one Eastern European scholar, male scholar on this exhibit thought, oh yeah, no problem. We'll just make it all about men, even though all the evidence that we have, 90% of the evidence that we have is from women's graves and women's things. But it was very disappointing because as an academic, you have a responsibility. And it is so wonderful to see pieces outside of Eastern Europe and traveling that share Eastern European history and heritage. And that makes me so happy. And I think many of us who are in the diaspora, because so many of us have been in the diaspora, are thirsting for seeing pieces of our own culture. And so I was very, very excited for that. But then to arrive and to see it presented in this very 1980s, 1990s academic way was just devastating and infuriating. And so this is why I made this episode. And I'm making this episode because I want you to be aware, as people who go to museums or to ancient sites, I want you to read the labels. I want you to be aware that, especially now that we're going through, lots of museums are starting to change their labels and they say, oh, well, we're going to add BCE to them, which is fine. And we're going to add whatever. As a person who's collected labels of museums pre and post, one of the things that I'm seeing that I will be talking about is the fact that the word goddess is pulled out, that the word woman is often pulled out. In fact, any gender is pulled out, even though it's very clearly evident. Any spiritual connection is pulled out, and we are left with just figurine. And I don't have a problem with claiming, calling a spade, like this is a figurine. And I don't have a problem with not making assumptions, but it feels like a dismissal and an erasure of religious, ritualistic, spiritualistic implications of what we find, right? And we have to be very, very careful, and we have to be very, very responsible, that we don't have future generations show up in museums that are sterilized of context. Yeah. Now, that being said, some of you might go, well, the context also depends and can be biased. Absolutely. 100%. So again, we have to remain vigilant. We have to continue having these conversations. And we have to challenge when we see things that are quite this dated. Yes. So for those of you who are joining me after the podcast, I will see you all there. And for those of you that have joined me today, thank you so much for staying with me, for watching this, for supporting this channel, for buying my book on Artemis, She Who Hunts. I'm in the middle of writing a second book on Artemis of Ephesus. For joining me on social media and my Patreon and supporting my travels. I am, a contract academic, as most of us are contract academics now, as the institutions are kind of starting to fall apart. And so your support in my research I'm so grateful for your support. I cannot put it into words. It allows me to present, to find, to photograph, to present this material to you. I am leaving for Crete in April, and I'm going to be in Europe most of the summer, and I hope to move to Crete permanently in September, well, semi-permanently, and then slowly make my way into permanently, and continue traveling and documenting rare sites, perhaps that maybe many people have not been to before, and going to museums and photographing images with labels of things that I feel are often not presented and not shared, even on Google, and your support is foundational because that kind of work requires both some free time to put things together and think and write, but also traveling and eating and living. So I want to thank you all for everything, that you've done, and for being here. And I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Now, moving forward, we will move into some goddesses. I'm going to look at Cybele, Atargatis, that I'm really becoming a little bit obsessed with, as she is then later on connected to Artemis. The double goddess. There's a few fantastic episodes coming up. And I also have a few interviews that I want to share with you. For example, we were talking about that woman, the book, The Woman Who Married the Bear. And Karina Kylo is one of the authors, and Barbara Mann is the other. And I interviewed Karina Kylo on bear culture and bear goddess culture. And so I'm going to post that in the coming weeks as well, that interview, which was really fun. So lots of things coming in the new year. I'm very, very excited. I'm glad to see you all again and to be with you all again. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.